So after that very, thank you, thoughtful comment, I'm opening the floor. We have just over 10 minutes left to questions. There we go. Our first question, please.
Thank you very much for your fascinating talks. I have questions for Peter and for Karen. Peter, I wanted to ask about the concept of Rome. Was it based on territorial terms alone, or was there something else? Like when people speaks about Rome, is it the same Rome that Deleuze speaks about? So that's my question for you. And Karen, I wanted to ask you if you take into consideration the duration of the conflict. Like, is there any connection between like futuristic aspects of the peace agreement and the duration of the conflict? And another thing is just like a more technical note or question. Do you use DH tools for identifying, like digital humanities tools? Digital humanities tools, like for identifying words that speak about time or sentiment analysis. That this can perhaps help you very much because you thought that, like you said that you have a lot of material to analyze.
And should I also respond to some of the good comments?
You may, yeah.
Thank you. Oh, this is lots of things for me to consider here. If I go through quickly some of the questions you raised, Polybius is a really important figure here. He's writing before the idea of Roman eternity is being vocalized in Rome, but it is being vocalized among Greeks who are being conquered by Rome. And so it's an interesting case where actually in my view, Rome's eternity first gets articulated not by the Romans, but by the conquered Greeks that are used to eternalizing Hellenistic monarchs. So they used to go to a Ptolemy in Egypt and say, "You're eternal Ptolemy." And Rome doesn't have a king at this point, it's a republic. They don't say, "You're eternal monarch," but you say, "You're eternal Rome." And so I think maybe the origin of, and Polybius I think is a sign of this mixture still. He does this anapsychosis, as he described, of you have a monarchy that turns into a tyranny, and a tyranny turns into an aristocracy. Everything's changing. But Rome is a mixed constitution, and so it won't change. But then he says later on, but it's natural, so it will change. And so Polybius still has this kind of, I think he has this mix to it. Quickly, the other points, I think there's a gap between, if you view Koselleck and Skinner as two poles, where Koselleck does these big trends and doesn't do a lot of contextualization sometimes. And Skinner's too pointillistic, where it's only about the immediate context in which the author is speaking. You don't see any trends at the time. So I would say what I'm trying to do is, I want to get away from the true Skinner view of doing things, which is you only read Sallust or Cicero or whoever by looking at his immediate context. And then you don't see any trends, and you lose the kind of way things change over time. So I try to do between those two. And then the havoc question, I think is a really interesting one, and there's some people argue that Rome's eternity gets stated more forcefully when things are going wrong. So under Tiberius, you have Sejanus, a guy threatening Tiberius the emperor's reign. That's when cities put up placards saying Rome's eternal.
So propaganda. So basically,
exactly, a response to uncertainty. So people have argued it's hard to know that because the contexts are often less clear than we want them to be. I guess one thing we do know is by when Rome really is kind of falling in the 4th century, 5th century AD, then Rome's eternity is stated not unconditionally. Then Rome's eternity is stated as definitely eternal. So as things really go bad, Rome's eternity is more and more taken for certain. But that's a different story centuries later. So those are my kind of quick thoughts for you on. And then on the territorial question, I think there's a weird way in which Rome is a city that can stand for the whole empire. And for some people they're talking about the city, sometimes they're talking about the whole empire. One historian writing towards the end of the Roman Empire, Ammianus Marcellinus, who always refers to Rome as the eternal city, but can refer to a city in Asia Minor and Anatolia, in modern-day Turkey, as in the neighborhood of Rome, the city, right? So there's I think there are different kinds. It is a good question, very complicated. I don't have you map out in different authors, but in general, there's a conflation from the city itself to the whole empire, and I think that really takes hold around the time of Hadrian, because Hadrian starts putting up temples to Roma Eterna, and before that you have it in statements and inscriptions, and if you don't have it deified in such a clear way. Once you have a deity that's Roma Eterna, that's clearly not just about physical, but it's more about the idea of the whole empire. So I think there's a switch there around the time of Hadrian. So this would be my kind of. So yeah, thank you for all the responses and the questions.
Okay, so starting with that, I think it's a really interesting comment about the open and closed future. I think it's really relevant to the context of conflict. Because something I think a lot about is how hard it is to imagine the future in the context and dynamic of conflict. That I think, and we can relate to that in the context of Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's really hard to imagine a reality that there is no conflict. Because I guess all of us was born into the conflict. It's the only thing that we know for our personal past. We're not sure how, like the reality that there is no conflict, it's just gone, how it will look like, which solution. It's something that's really hard to imagine. So I think it's interesting regarding the perception of time of our open and closed future. Of do we really can imagine this open or more like open possibilities of future and context. And I think it's also that's about the other comment about the long run of the national and the history. I think that's it might be very important if the conflict is not active, because I think as well as the conflict is active conflict, which like there is definition of at least 25 people dead a year and like an active violent conflict. Yeah, I know. The way that people are perceiving time, I think it's different. Like the present is the living despite. I mean, I think in this situation, this long duration of national difference will actually, intuitive, I would say, will closer the future possibility, because it's deepening their identities and deepening the way to perceiving the other. So I think it's might relevant when the active is not, the conflict is not active, and it's interesting to think about. Regarding the durability of the peace, it's like the next step of how to explain why peace processes ended in agreement that is more future or past oriented in different types. And they do it it's a more statistical work. In these data sets, I have the duration of the conflict, the issue of the conflict, the conflict or not, how democratic was the country, like a lot of data that maybe like it will be the next step to start to see hints of like which kind of conflict produce this kind of agreement. So yeah, that's an next project. And regarding the more computer text analysis, yeah, I started and thought like it's going to be easy job just to put it to set the computer, find time rendition, but it didn't work because it's a complex concept, time rendition, and what I got from the computer analysis was really shallow and like time, day, years, like. I felt like I went deeper to understand.
Technology is not necessarily the solution to technology, as we just.
Yeah, that's part of. Yeah. So sorry.
Yeah.
Since time is short.
Just
go ahead, please.
Yeah. So it's to recognize that you gave us like very important insights to the readings. It's just to reflect that we're in the law in this paper. You're right, like the laws, especially I am more of into the agreement that were negotiated during these periods, during Ethiopia's encounter with the Western world. And actually, this paper was just to provide some of the backgrounds, the historiographical backgrounds, and the way how I can read, like, we always have this hesitation, as a lawyer or like an international lawyer, whether we really read the existing historiographies and their periodization in a way that can fit into our legal understanding and our legal histories. So most of the the laws. Of course, in the paper I tried to incorporate some of the recognition of this grand narrative of Solomonic dynasty in the constitutions. For example, in the 931 constitution, in the 955 constitution, the last emperor of that dynasty, he explicitly recognized what's being written in this book, which is the Queen of Sheba and her only son Minilik, which is the Kibra Negus. Of course, it has an English translation which you can find in the library here in Tau, what is translated into in a fascinating way. So he incorporated how his Imperial Majesty was a direct descendant of Minilik I, who was an offspring of Queen Sheba and King Solomon. So that legitimizes this grand narrative that translates into a legal document. And just for Peter's information, this document recognizes only two eternal monarchies. That these monarchies are the Roman monarchy and Ethiopian monarchy, because they were children of Christ. It explicitly provides that these are eternal monarchies. Fortunately or unfortunately, the eternity of the Ethiopian monarchy had stopped by the impatient revolutionary generations in 1974. So maybe like your insights gives me, because there are still claims on the diaspora that this is a cultural genocide, that this monarchy shouldn't be disposed, and it needs to be at least recognized within existing legal frameworks, so that there is a claim of continuing this monarchy, the Solomonic dynasty, and actually some perceive this, the ending of this monarchy, is a problem that we are facing right now. So that's the way, and actually, when it comes to some understanding notions of independence and freedom, and of course, this is part of my project, how the history and the Ethiopian encounters because there are existing international legal histories on Ethiopia, but most of them are obsessed with the League of Nations period. The League of Nations, how the League of Nations fails to act to respond to the Italian invention, but there has to be some historical background. How Ethiopians saw their counterparts and how they were leading their nation and why they become a member to the family of nations. So this national periodization, most of the time the international legal historians started to the time right after Ethiopia's admission to the League of Nations. But you are right, there has to be a sort of just making sense of the national time framework and some global time frameworks. But if we start sometimes earlier than the League of Nations period, we could find some notions, real notions of Ethiopian-centric or Ethiocentric understanding of independence. So you're right, and actually I am using this long durée approach in the project, and actually that's how most of historians of Ethiopia, who are non-natives and natives, they dealt some of the survival of Ethiopian independence, the secret behind its survival, and how Ethiopians were ready to integrate with the international system at a time they were resisting them. It's like an anomaly and an exception to some other African nations, like a post-colonial or a struggle for independence just started after they were colonized. Yeah. But in Ethiopia, it was a different history. They started, in the first place, actually, it dates back to, their encounter dates back to the medieval period. Even Ethiopians started to have a diplomatic encounter. I mean, just using the Queen of Sheba period, it's prehistory, but in historic period, they started to approach Westerners and they sent in emissaries and some travelers to find Europeans, and the Europeans respond in their counter. It was in the medieval period, in the prehistoric maybe.
A very important point here, perhaps you related, but I think, and I did not mention it, emphasize this enough, but the narrative that Ethiopia is the second nation after the Armenians, each one is fighting who was the first one to accept Christianity as a nation. That is an important point, because it replaced to Roma Eterna, because this was the 4th century, They fight with the Armenians, who was the first one, but it doesn't matter. But the notion, that's a very important notion because it tells you something about eternal sort of form. And we were before the West accepting the religion of the West, even the West. So that is a notion. Even though we were monophysitic and so on.
You're right. That's one of the stories that's being built. Like, no, we didn't receive Christianity from Europe, the Western.
Straight from the.
It's straight from because like they aligned themselves. Like, this Judeo-Christianity, like for example, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church had its own role in the creation of these narratives, and so they claim that being we are monotheist Christians, so that we maintain both the Old Testament and also the New Testament. And the way we did Christianity, they claim that it's different from even the West, and actually it's an Eastern Orthodox approach. Even within the Eastern Orthodox approach, Ethiopians claim that we first received Christianity, and actually when it comes to some laws, they claim that we were ruled by laws. For example, these 10 commandments that the Moses received from God, they believe that because the Ark of Covenant itself is in Ethiopia. So that gives them, actually it's a claim, whether it's exactly there or not would be, I mean, a question. Of course, some historians try to discover where the Ark of Covenant really is. And the Ethiopian priests told them, it's in the Church of Dion in the northern Ethiopia, Aksum, which is the starting of the Ethiopian civilization. So, of course, these travelers and researchers approached to the church, and finally they were told that no, you shouldn't just, we couldn't open it, the plate and show you guys, and you shouldn't be fooled. And it has to be, it's only the priest that they can pray and see the Ark of the Covenant, but they told them that it's mostly, so it's like the grand...
Indiana Jones did it. Yeah.
So the grand narrative is to take Ethiopia at the center of the world. So it's to try to see in the like there is a third world approach to international law and like global south approach to international law. It's an attempt to put this narrative, to put Ethiopia at the center of, I mean, should it be seen any challenge to the global order, should it always be seen from like a resistance, or some global southern states can be placed at the center of this investigation. So this is what I am trying to do. So thank you. So I will incorporate all your insights and all the presentations were helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're already out of time.
So
No, it's on all of us. I do encourage you to pick up these conversations and questions and mingle outside. There's food. I want to thank all of our speakers and for a wonderful and exciting panel. So bravo and thank you.